Hello, good day. This is the presentation of a geospatially distributed e-refugee camp Caribbean small island developing states. My name is Gaspard-Chickoree. Caribbean small island developing states, particularly Trinidad and Tobago and Curacao, are receiving an unexpected large amounts of forced migrants. A forced migrant is any person that is only migrating because they are forced to, whether it is because of hunger, as is the case of Venezuela in South America, political distress, or other. Countries such as Trinidad and Tobago do not have any domestic laws in place to receive forced migrants, particularly because it is a problem they have not faced like they are facing currently. As a result, NGOs or non-governmental organizations, NPOs, non-profit organizations, INGOs, international NGOs and others are forced to do the receiving and aiding of these forced migrants, particularly as there are no refugee settlements. Currently, UNHCR has guidelines for designing refugee camps. However, studies have found that these are inefficient in different aspects, and usually within a year, they fail. Research has proposed a new way or new approach to refugee settlements, and UNHCR themselves prefer alternatives to traditional refugee camps. In a new proposal, one should look at a refugee settlement as one that has a source of permanence. Most refugee settlements, the traditional refugee settlements, have refugees there for sometimes over a decade before they are permanently relocated or integrated into an indigenous population. So one must design a settlement with permanence in mind, as well as dynamic by nature, and also, most importantly, incorporates physical, cultural, political, social, and economical resources to keep this settlement going. So essentially, the design should support spatial planning while adhering to UNHCR's settlement guidelines. The UNHCR published Refugee Protection and Solutions in Urban Area Guidelines, which this research has looked, or this study has looked at intensely and used that to develop the framework. UNHCR also has web services, which is an application programming interface that allows one to transmit or receive information over the internet. So that allows you to have interoperability and integration between IT services. And the framework also is built on that, which is basically a service-oriented architecture. To design the framework, the research takes two distinct steps. Primary and secondary data collection, with Trinidad and Tobago being the case study, just for ease in primary data collection, and an application of software methodologies that have been tried and tested. Specifically, RAD, which stands for Rapid Application Development, and open source Canvas, which is a variation of lean Canvas. These methodologies were used for requirements gathering and prioritization to develop the minimal viable product, or MVP, prototyping and the conceptual design, and evaluation of the produced wireframes and requirements. So these three steps, as well as primary data collection, could only be done successfully with partnership by existing NGOs such as Living Water Community, as well as certain churches that have been playing the role of receiving forced migrants and providing aid in various forms, including medical aid, providing food, and in certain cases, shelter. An analysis of the primary data has found, and a prioritization of it, of course, have found shelter and employment to be the two most urgent needs of a forced migrant. That said, a traditional refugee camp is not suitable for Caribbean small island development states. Traditional refugee camps have been found to have many disadvantages, and these include illnesses, being overcrowded, inability for the persons to work or provide for themselves and have a certain level of independence, mental health, such as psychological distress, domestic violence, and also just a lack of dignity and normalcy. That said, outside of these disadvantages, Caribbean small island development states also has a space issue. And it is not as easy to have a separate location to house a large number of migrants and still keep them separate from the indigenous population. However, certain models or certain experiences in the past has found that forced migrants, once integrated with the indigenous population, provides many benefits and is thus the recommended solution. This has been found in the case of Tanzania, where Rwandans were able to integrate with the indigenous populations, as well as in Zambia and Zaire, where Angolan refugees were also able to integrate with the indigenous population, work, go to school, and have medical aid, and they were able to thrive better, but also have a positive impact on the economy of the local population. What you see here is the representation of the open source canvas for the proposed framework. So essentially, the minimal viable product had to be defined using the lean canvas methodology. And it was found that the MVP is a web system that can track and house forced migrants, where shelter is the highest priority of need for the forced migrants, as well as for the NGOs to satisfy this need for the forced migrants. The canvas is separated, as you can see, in different categories, such as the problem, solution, activities, the unique value proposition of the solution, the community relationships, the end users, the channels by which it will reach the end users, costs and resources to get this from a thought to something physical, and the adoption criteria within a society. This is a pictorial representation of the GDEC within Trinidad, or the Geospatially Distributed e-Refugee Camp, which is the proposed framework. The GDEC says that we want to be able to spatially map and track forced migrants, volunteers, safe zones, and other pertinent services. Two examples were displayed here: police stations and health facilities. A safe zone would ideally be a NGO, NPO that is partnering with local governments. So for example, in Trinidad, it could be churches and Living Water Community. So a forced migrant should be able to see a list of safe zones and know that this is a place where they can go without fear of persecution or human trafficking or anything like that. Safe zones volunteers should register via a geo form, which is just a form that allows you to capture geospatial data as well. And the data in that form should adhere to the refugee protection and solution guidelines in urban areas. So basically, it allows the administrators to get the information from the prospective safe zones and volunteers and be able to see if their homes, their shelters, whatever it may be, would fall in the guidelines of the the UNHCR's Refugee Protection and Solutions Guidelines. In conclusion, the traditional stationary geographically positioned camp is not suitable for Caribbean states. A partnership between NGOs and local government is important, and the framework would not be successful without such a partnership. It is impossible to leave out NGOs, even if when we look at other island states, such as Australia and Japan, when they also received an influx of forced migrants in various places, they also did not have domestic laws in place, particularly Japan, and the government had no formal response to the problem, which left a huge gap, and that led to the NGOs taking the responsibility to assist the persons that come in and support them with their basic needs. And basically, this is happening in the Caribbean small island states, and different NGOs provide different levels of services. It is the recommendation of this framework that each partner within the GDEC framework be trained in sphere humanitarian standards so that there is a uniform response to forced migrants and they each will receive the same quality of treatment and care. Forced migrants should be integrated with indigenous population. It is not only more beneficial and safe to the forced migrants, but also to the indigenous population. However, having a GDEC framework allows the government to maintain tracking. It also allows the government to disperse the burden on local services such as police and medical care throughout the island and not in one centralized location. Free open source software does benefit Caribbean advancement. It is the recommendation of this framework that the developments be done via open source, particularly utilizing frameworks such as United Nations online volunteering service. A GDEC can be placed within that service and it can be monitored within an organized solution such as that, where volunteers throughout the world can assist in rapidly developing the framework to meet the needs of a small Caribbean island. It is also imperative that the data be protected, and that has to be administered by local governments. Once the data is received, it is also recommended that it is shared with the United Nations by use of web services, as well as data should be in the formats of the guidelines, such as legends used. Forced migrants have to be sheltered effectively. And in capturing data and sending out questionnaires for this purpose of this study, it was found that there are many persons and landlords who are willing to shelter forced migrants, some for short term and long. Some countries, such as Trinidad and Tobago, has allowed forced migrants to work for 1 year, which will allow them the opportunity to pay their own rents and live within the comforts of their own home. However, partnership has to be maintained and policies put in place to allow forced migrants to work on a more permanent basis. Forced migrants should be assisted based on the Sphere humanitarian standards as well as UNHCR's guidelines, which was already discussed. The use of tried and proven software methodologies is useful for requirements gathering, user design, and validation, which should allow a small island state to be able to avoid repeating the requirements gathering phase and go straight into development to meet an urgent need. In the future, an implementation of the proposed software has to be done with the appropriate partnership between an NGO or NGOs and local government in order for an effective analysis of that framework. There can even be burden sharing across countries once more than one state is using the GDEC framework successfully. Potentially, migrants can move across countries if needed or other resources. That concludes today's presentation. I look forward for any questions that there may be. Thank you.